Hello and welcome to Sustain, the podcast where we talk about sustaining open source for the long haul. Who are we? Where did we come from? Where are we going? Where is all that stuff written down? I'm very excited to talk to our guest today. Before I introduce our guest, I want to make sure you know who the voices are in this podcast. This is my voice, and I'm the only host. I'm Richard Littauer. Hello, everyone. Great to be here. And I'm joined today by the illustrious Jenn Turner. Jenn, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for coming on. Jenn is joining us today from Kansas City, Missouri, where she is a content strategist at Fastly, working on the Glitch team, which is really cool. I'm not sure if we've had someone on from Fastly before. We have had Jen Schiffer, different Jen, different number of N's in the name from Glitch.
Same number of N's.
Same
actually.
Number? Still two?
Mm-hmm. Yep. We're both Jens with two N's. We call our combined creative force Genergy.
That was a great podcast. Thank you, everyone. Okay, nothing else to talk about today. Cool. Jenn is a strategist and a writer who's always found the people in tech more fascinating than the innovation part. She was trained as a journalist, and she says in her bio that I'm reading from that she has good instincts figuring out where good stories are told. And you may have heard her voice before at Node.js, Hoodie, Neighborhoodie, NPM, and Yet, which is actually a whole name, and Yet, ampersand Yet, even, Fastly and Glitch. So, Jenn, that is awesome. It's great to have another ex-Noder or just Node JavaScript person here on the podcast. Now, obviously, as a writer, and not necessarily as a coder, as someone who thinks more on the creative side, finding your way into open source must have been a weird journey. How did that happen?
It was, actually. It was a weird, strange journey. Like I said, trained as a journalist, got my degree in English literature, which was very lucrative, but had the misfortune of graduating right around the time of the recession. And so if you were alive back then, newspapers, everything was pivoting to the web. Before they pivoted to video, they were pivoting to the web. And so newsrooms were not hiring, and I ended up in retail, which was my own kind of personal hell. But I ended up reconnecting with an old college buddy because we were both working on the university newspaper. I was the editor-in-chief, and she was actually my art director and head creative genius. And her name was Amy Lynn Taylor. It's now Augsburger. But she was working at And Yet, and they were looking for somebody with a specific skill set. So I joined up, and it wasn't until about a year in, so it would have been around probably the end of 2012, I was editing a book that Henrik Jortag released called Human JavaScript. And we were trying to kind of bring together folks from the Node community and the Backbone.js community together into this new framework and community that we were trying to build. And so it was editing a book that brought me to open source. And I believe it's still out there somewhere. I know Henrik is a very successful freelancer and a great guy.
We've linked that in the chat. That'll be in the show notes. I remember Amy Lynn Taylor in particular. Didn't she and you work on some really interesting community type websites where you could go to a fireside and try to find your vision and journey or something?
Oh my gosh. Yeah, that was a community. It was an immersive community effort that we tried to put online first, where people could do some of the deeper soul searching and sort of what is my purpose? How can I align my career goals with who I am as a person and what I really want from life? Long story short, it started out as this beautiful, wonderful project where we were trying to tug on hearts and change people's lives. And in the end, it became a forum.
Oh, no.
That I alone updated once a week. It was not because of Amy's brilliant artwork. I'm still mimicking her in the stuff that I design for offline purposes. But yeah, she's an amazing talent. I'm so lucky to have worked with her. And you should definitely check out her stuff, Amy Lynn Augsburger.
So you mentioned that English literature isn't lucrative. Well, you said it was lucrative. I assume that was sarcasm. Editing is also not incredibly lucrative. And especially not when you're working with maintainers of open source software who oftentimes are trying to make money themselves and try to figure things out. It's great that Henrik has a good freelancing consulting career. That is one of the avenues that people take, although it does take them away from open source a lot. Can you tell me how you navigated being an editor through the world of open source?
Sure. I mean, one of the funny things about the tech industry to me personally is how much emphasis is put on the ability to code, because you could be the world's most intelligent coder, just absolute genius, but have no skill set to bring a community along or even communicate what the value of your project is to people. And so those types of communication skills that you learn in taking humanities courses, I cannot sing the praises of like developing critical thinking skills as early as possible in your education. But there is a huge hole when it comes to technical teams and groups' ability to communicate as well as promote their work. And so that's where being an editor and a writer has been a really, really, I guess, lucrative, to use that word again, because I'm able to use those skills naturally. And it's kind of funny because the tech industry is the only industry I've ever worked in where I can give folks a rough draft of something. And I know it's a rough draft. I'm looking for feedback because I never believe that like the first thing that I wrote down is the best work I can do, right? It needs input. It needs feedback and collaboration. But more often than not, when I give deeply technical folks something written and ask them to proofread it, they're like, looks great, ship it. It still happens like 12 years into my career. And I'm like, there's no way this can be the best possible version of this. Like, how do I translate that request into like a PR or something where you'll like understand what the type of feedback that I'm looking for here? Communication skills, the ability to make a clear argument, make a clear value proposition, like those are huge in terms of getting people to understand what you're creating, how it's going to benefit them, how's it going to make their lives easier. And yeah, I think a lot of people, when they think tech industry, they just think of coding. And that's definitely not the case for the most successful projects that we see out there.
So are you saying that there's a cabal of the most successful projects in the world, which are actually run by really fancy editors under the hood, trying to figure out how to communicate stuff?
The most successful projects, in all honesty, have benevolent patrons in the form
BDFLs, benevolent dictators for life.
Yeah, in the form of company donations or in-kind services, where you know the folks are allowed to work on their open source work as their full-time job. At least that's been my experience of open source projects that are fairly popular and thriving.
So I've seen a lot of people enter open source communities from the humanities, from English literature, and try to do things like newsletters or onboarding docs or tutorials. And it's really difficult. I almost put myself in that category, although I do have a technical background in some sense. But a lot of the times I get pushed towards the more humanities side of the team because that's where my talents lie. And that's where I'm more excited to do work. I don't like debugging. It's horrible. But one of my questions for you is, as someone who came in with this particular focus and particular skill set, why did you not get pushed into more and more technical roles or more and more DevRel roles where you're sort of out there preaching the word about the tech, but also kind of a pseudo-techie yourself? How have you managed to stay true to, I'm just a writer who works in open source?
It's tough. I mean, the pressure to learn how to code is real. In my first job, the CEO actually, who started the company, was a front-end developer. And he was super kind to create like a programming 101 course for all of the non-technical staff. So it was like me and our accountant and the office manager and a few other folks. And I go back and forth with whether to consider myself like a developer or not, because I came of age at the turn of the century. So I learned how to code to have a better MySpace background or to update my LiveJournal themes. And so there's an area that I'm comfortable with. But going beyond that, I realized in that earlier class, like, this is not something I'm passionate about. These are not the types of problems that my brain is attuned to solving. I see stuff in my mind as text, and I've always struggled with numbers in my head. And so coding is so much math, which is fairly obvious to people in the industry, but they don't really talk about that much up front when it's like, learn how to code, deploy your own web page, or I guess that's the difference between front end and like app development or DevOps or back end. But I had to firmly state that this is at best a hobby of mine, but not really an interest. I'm more interested in solving problems of communication and strategy and working on the more creative side of how we express why people should care about the things we're working on.
Have you found yourself gravitating more towards paid positions because it's easier to sort of have that amount of power to actually help with strategy because of that? Or have you also been able to finagle freelancing out of that?
I've done it all. I was a non-technical contributor for the Node.js community, and they hired me to write their newsletter. So I was writing the Node.js community newsletter for quite a while. And then when that relationship ended, I had the opportunity to serve on one of the core working group teams, which was the community committee with a lot of wonderful people. And I don't know if you were around back in those days. It would have been around 2014.
I was on ComCom.
Yeah, the
Those were the
ComCom.
days.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
I was on it with like Brian Hughes, and I know Tierney.
Yep.
Siren was on there. So many people from the Node community, obviously. And that was just because I had been in the community and I really cared about the direction of the project. And this was an opportunity to actually use my skill set in a working group setting, which is not typically the case because they're making, for the most part, a lot of deeply technical decisions or working through the conflict resolution process.
That's fair. I guess for me, having also been self-perceived as a non-technical member of a lot of these sort of committees and groups, the question has always been, great, how can I reframe that as I'm a technical person doing non-technical roles? And so I don't tell people, oh, I'm a writer. Well, that's probably not true. I probably do. But like, I don't tell people who I'm looking for jobs for or on open source things. Like, I'm a writer. I say, no, I'm a technical person. I was on these committees. And if anyone asks, I'll be like, yeah, I was doing the hard decisions of figuring out strategy and writing the newsletter, which was important. I don't lie. I don't say I was there writing the heavy P2P protocols at the bottom of like libp2p. It's like, no, that was not me. But I've never been coherent or consistent in saying I'm just a writer working on these things and I'm not technical and I don't want to be technical, even though I'm on these technical committees. And so I guess you answered this earlier. How do you avoid that? Like, I'm really curious how you ended up just continually saying, no, I'm not technical while still having all these technical chops.
I'm really glad you asked that because the team that I work on now, Glitch, Fastly is our employer. They acquired Glitch a couple of years back. I frequently get in trouble for calling myself non-technical because I've produced podcasts in the past. I've created and edited videos. I understand MGML from years of coding newsletters. And so there's a lot of, especially from Anil Dash, he encourages me not to frame myself as a non-technical person. But honestly, I don't take it personal. It's just a shorthand way of communicating like, my value on this team is not in creating code, which I mean, truly no one's value is creating code on a project. It's their thought process and all of the intentions and goals and things that they're working towards. So I don't know. It's just the diminutive way that we talk about our work that I think people are moving away from in a bigger sense because we just had a round of layoffs at Fastly, which sucks, but it's part of the business. And one of the things that came up in some conversations is the whole conundrum of when you're out in public and you meet new people, how do you describe what you do when you're not employed? Because when you meet people at a party, one of the first things, hi, I'm so-and-so. If you're not figuring out their connection to the people you know, then the next question is, what do you do?
If you're American,
and, yeah, if you're American, fair, very fair. I am American and I've been fully immersed in American culture. I'm trying to deprogram myself. Because did you know that US history isn't the de facto way history went in the world?
No, I'm shocked. I'm
discovering this as an adult. Yes. So it's been an education. So I don't know. A long time ago, I decoupled my identity from my work because I was also a young single mother. And when I was younger and in the tech industry, I was very hungry to prove myself, to prove my worth, to prove that I was as valuable as a code contributor to our team. And that really burnt me out. And it put me in a place where I didn't have a good handle on boundaries between work and professional life. I wasn't valuing the things that really matter, which work matters. It gives us purpose and it's the way that we make a living. But those nights and weekends with my kid, I can never get those back. And there's a saying that is going around the internet that I think about a lot. And it's that no one from work is going to remember the nights and the weekends that you put in the extra hours, but your kids will. My daughter is my reason for becoming a grown-up and like maturing and like learning things about the world so that I can model, hopefully, fingers crossed, what a good, healthy person looks like in the world and how they explore it and interact with it and like learn from it and grow. And so I had to decouple my worth from my occupation. So I guess part of calling myself a writer is continuing to do that because I'm not just a writer. I have created illustrations for my businesses or the places where I've worked. Like I truly feel like a jack of all trades. If something's on the internet and it has an interface that I can understand, let me mess with it and I could probably figure it out.
I really like that. That's really useful, especially the idea of splitting up your work from your worth and doing that in non-technical roles in open source. I don't hear a lot that people should totally decouple themselves. What you hear instead is go harder or go longer, but do it sustainably, which is like, great. What does that mean exactly? And it's never really, how do you draw the owl?
Yeah.
And so trying to decouple that makes a lot of sense. And I understand that. I guess what I'm curious about, given that you've now been around for a decade in this space, and you've done that by hopping between lucrative positions here and here, filling in with consultancy where needed, but you've been in the space for a while as a serious member of the open source community, whatever that means. What advice would you give to non-technical people looking to join a project? How would you have them talk about their work and their potential value add for an open source project?
Well, certainly there are open source projects that have tried to be more welcoming to different types of contributors. And when I was working with Jan Leonard at Neighborhoody, we tried to do that. And we got a fairly good response, but we ran into the issue of they can get paid doing more in their industry. So we ran into issues of funding. What's the value add if I don't have relationships in this space and I'm not getting paid? And to that, I say the people are what have kept me in this industry. And one of the ways I like to tell folks who are early career tech folks is that one of the best ways to make community and gain some visibility of your own in this industry is to speak at conferences. That's what truly helped me. That's in 2014, I met a core group of people that really influenced my tech career. Jen Schiffer, who we mentioned earlier, being one of them, Brian Brennan, Tracy Hines, Ashley Williams, so many people I met talking on the JSConf circuit in 2014, 2015. And that's what kept me in, was meeting these folks who were like-minded and passionate and normal and fun and human, who had their ups and downs. And it wasn't just about a job or making the best project or product or whatever. It was truly the human aspect is what's kept me here, those relationships. So I would say, look at, I almost don't want to encourage people who have never seen GitHub before to look at it. No offense, GitHub. It's an acquired taste. It's quite a learning curve. If you are used to the interface of Facebook, it's quite the learning curve GitHub is. And I'm glad to see more companies decoupling their documentation for business things from GitHub, because I've been on many teams that are like, oh, the toilet's leaking, file an issue in this repo. And it's like, what? No, you got to call someone. We can't do business like this. So another thing I would say is if you see somebody's work online that you admire and that you draw inspiration from, would be to, if they're going to be at an event, look at who are the other speakers. I tend to look for like art and code things when I'm looking to go to an event personally, because that intersection of art and code for me is just like, it almost doesn't get better than that, because I love artistic expression and coding, building those types of things. It's, oh my gosh. I'm thinking right now of Coven Verdi. He's given so many talks. He used to live in the Boston area, but he did these like surprise and delight type art installations in public spaces where like there was a light string, and if you screamed at the light rope, it would like change colors and like mimic the vibrations of your screaming. And so he showed us a video in his conference talk of these strangers just screaming, like not knowing that they're being filmed, like just screaming at this rope light. And it was amazing. So for that, like if I knew that Coven was going to be speaking, I would look at the event and see who else is going to be there, if there's anything interesting. And so maybe that's one that's worth going to for you, where you can meet some of their network and start to build your community from there. But definitely don't be creepy about it.
Yeah, it's the same for me, obviously. A lot of the names you mentioned, I put them in the show notes. We're all in sort of the same groups. At some point, we're going to run out of Richard's personal friends from the JavaScript days. Hasn't happened yet. Brian Brennan, I hope you're doing well. If you're listening, come on the podcast. Yeah, that really helped me as well. Something else I would recommend to people, since we're talking about recommendations, I guess, is get involved with organizing those events. They always need volunteers all the time.
Oh my gosh, yes. And it's such a great way to meet like the best people in the industry too. Event organizers, when I think of events, I think of this Disney quote, which please forgive me for the Disney, but Walt Disney has this quote where he says, "It's kind of fun to do the impossible." And I think about that all the time because it's a type of magic, bringing people together on the right topics at the right time for those connections to happen. I just have so much love and respect for event organizers because it's truly a labor of love for sure.
I do like it's fun to do the impossible. There are some podcasts I have where I have conversations with a guest and it just feels like, yeah, obviously do that. Great, cool. And it's very difficult to find like a germ of discord or something else to say. For me, it's really, really clear. Hey, you want to have a thriving, healthy open source community, you need to think about your strategy in terms of how you put out written and social content. If you're going to do that, you should hire someone from a humanities background to be there, and they will pay for themselves by enabling a larger community at scale in general. And you can get funding for that sort of work because if you continue to do it well, your community will continue to grow if it's positioned well. If it's not, well, then nothing you were going to do is going to help. So the question for me is not like, how do you do that? It's pretty clear how you do that. But then it's tough to figure out what's hard there. So I guess maybe I'll start there. In your career, what has been the most difficult part of being a content strategist / writer, besides asking people to understand the worth and value of your words? What's been really difficult for making sure that work happens?
For me, the tech industry, it's a constantly changing landscape. And I feel like you have to have a level of cultural fluency in order to be able to authentically connect with your audience. And that has always been easy for me because a lot of it, so much of it happened in these public forums like Twitter. After the social debacle of 2022 with what's his face taking over and segments of the community splintering, that has become a very, very difficult challenge because where do you go to reach your audience now? Some of them are still there. Some of them are on Mastodon. Some of them have descended into the depths of Discord and Slack communities where you can't see or reach them at all unless you want to have the most chaotic notifications on your screen of all time. By joining as many as you can, that's not good for anyone's mental health. And there's all these other places where community is growing, like Co-host and Blue Sky. So that has actually been one of the greatest challenges in terms of staying relevant and teaching other people who want to write for tech how it is that they can stay on top of cultural fluency. That part's been really, really hard because while I do feel like divesting from Twitter is the right move because the internet was never made to be like several walled gardens or silos. It should be a human thing made by human people and it should feel human. It does make it harder when there's no town square to point at. That's a challenge that I still haven't figured out. The thing that we have tried to do at Glitch and with Fastly is to remain in those spaces. So we still have like Twitter presence and stuff like that, but really push to have the discussions in our own community forums so that people feel like those places are places where they could show up and get answers to their questions, maybe give other people answers to their questions, maybe have a discussion with open source maintainer. Fastly has this program called Fast Forward, where we made a $50 million commitment to providing services to open source projects. And so we support a ton of open source projects and maintainers that are in our forums talking about what their issues are and stuff like that. But it has become more closed off. And I don't like that that's happening, but I also don't have a solution for it either.
Are you using some sort of CRM to help manage how you engage with different subsets of communities?
Oh, that I could. The CRMs of the web 2.0, they don't want to pay for a Twitter API subscription anymore. How do you track across Mastodon instances? So no, there's no CR. Or if there is, if you're listening to this and you know one, please reach out to me at jennturner.com and let me know what you're using so I can subscribe to.
How long have you been at Fastly?
2-ish years. I've been at Glitch for another year on top of that. So it counts as 3.
So that includes since the 2022 debacle, which I would say is still debacling right along the tracks.
Yeah.
Are you in charge of a team of content writers who are helping to push out things to the different social networks, or are you doing it all on your own?
So Fastly is the first place I've ever worked that's had a content team in my 12 years. Writing social content for Glitch is the easiest thing in the world. Air quotes here. I was on the marketing team with Anil Dash and Jen Schiffer, 2 of the greatest posters to social media in history. So yeah, I could never take credit for Glitch Social because that's a voice and a presence that was established by those 2.
And it was really good.
And
like
others,
they're amazing.
Yeah. Glitch and Twitter back in the day was like peanut butter and jelly. So good. But I would say it's me with help from other folks. So when somebody comes to me and they're like, hey, can you share this on Twitter or Mastodon or wherever? Well, I always ask them, why would developers care about this? And not to be rude, but like, I want them to tell me, what is the interesting thing here? What is the story? You're sharing this because you worked on it. I'm not just going to put up a post because that's the end of your checklist. You got to tell me, what's the story here? What's going to make people read this and be like, whoa, click on the link and engage with it. So I try to push our team when they want to share something on socials. What's the prompt that goes along with it? Because I am not a programmer. I don't understand how this is going to make a developer's life easier. But if it does, I'm pretty sure that they would want to know about that. So I work alongside many social content writers. I'll say that much. I think we're probably in a situation like most other folks.
Well, I'm asking because I was trying to figure out whether or not you're operationalizing, outsourcing some of that work so that it's run by many hands, so that it's not just a single person doing it, but instead it's a community thing, which is driven, which I think is a solution for a lot of open source projects because the main maintainers don't have the bandwidth to be a social media person. They don't have the funds to hire a humanities grad, as cheap as that might be. And so trying to figure out how do we operationalize it? How do we ensure other people can come and fill those roles and be part of that team is really, really useful. So I was curious how you've done that at Fastly/Glitch.
Back to what I said. And this was a thing that I did before, like when I was running like CouchDB socials and stuff like that. CouchDB, PouchDB, shout out to my friend Nolan Lawson, who will always be famous. You know, I feel like when you are working on an open source project and you're the lead maintainer, one of the best things that you can do is give people permission to do things. And you and I were talking about unconference, like having had run unconference events in the past. When I was at And Yet, we ran one called TriCon. in the Tri-Cities, if you're familiar with Eastern Washington. And it was just my favorite thing in the world because it was basically like you show up, there's something that you have done in your life that you can teach to other people, or you have an interesting, entertaining story to tell. Let's make that talk happen. Let's tell that story. Like if you have an idea for how to make this experience better, you have all of the permission in the world to go and do that. And I think that that's a lesson that open source maintainers can learn in terms of building out their team, because I do feel like there is this idea that you have to be one thing. My value in contributing to this open source is that I'm great at debugging, or I can write this type of script in a few hours or whatever. But if you give folks permission to do stuff, you have no idea what type of crazy, hilarious perspective somebody from DevOps can have on your socials if you give them permission. And also just like paying attention when people are talking passionately about stuff, that always draws my attention. And if you're working in open source, maybe that can be a little bit hard to discern because so much of it happens over written types of communication. But I think just being really upfront about like, this is a cool thing that we make together and it will benefit from whatever type of contribution you feel like you are willing to give to this project, that'll always make the project better. And the people will enjoy contributing to it and they will tell other people and your community will grow.
Which comes down to another question, which is you mentioned earlier, you have to share why it's meaningful and what the story is behind your social media posts and why people should care. I don't know why I care about the things I care about half the time. I genuinely don't know. This morning, I was looking up Latin names that were misgendered in the species versus the genus in a small genus of isopod. I don't think anyone else is ever going to care about that. And so I don't know what to post there. So what do you do when you're faced with the problem of like, this is just something I'm doing because it's interesting to me? Do I have to sit and understand what interest means for 7 years and get a philosophy degree first before I can really unpack that?
No. This is where a style guide comes in handy. And it doesn't have to be anything elaborate, but like here are the rules. We use GIFs. We don't use GIFs. We will participate in a meme. We won't participate in a meme. At Glitch, in our style guide, we use emoji. We use a lot of emoji because Glitch is fun. Emoji is fun. That's just one of the ways that we have always expressed ourselves in social posts and actually everywhere. If you look at the blog, like I put emoji in all the blogs and it's everywhere. It's actually in the interface now that I think about it. But having a set of guidelines gives people permission to kind of go wild with it. It doesn't have to be anything more than what I just said, figuring those out and saying like the tone of voice should sound like your friendly neighbor who wants to give you a heads up on this or whatever. Or like we speak in like a first person voice or a third person voice. Like, so just having those types of like basic guidelines, it doesn't have to be Webster's dictionary. I think a lot of people think style guide and they think, oh no, I have to write all the rules. That's definitely not the case for social media. So that's where I would say having guidelines or an outline to like what good looks like and what we don't want to do is going to help you out a lot in terms of giving people permission to express themselves socially on media.
Plus, I guess the code is more like guidelines type thing, right? Guidelines don't have to be strict. They can just be general.
Yeah.
Jenn, this has been really useful. We are running up on time. So I just want to thank you so much for taking the time today. Where can people find your work?
My website, jennturner.com, is actually a Glitch app. It is an app called Glitch in Bio, which is basically the same thing as like your link tree, or I think there's another one I can't remember the name of, but it's free. You could go to glitch.com, and if you don't know how to code, you can just remix the Glitch in Bio starter, change the text to be your name, your links, and boom, it's live, it's ready. So that's where you can go to find out more about my work. Also the Glitch blog, you'll see my byline on there a ton. I'm going to be posting the August recap of what the Glitch community built later this week. It's always fun and exciting to see the different ways people create on Glitch.
And of course, if you're listening, this has already come out, so you can go check those out. And you can follow Jenn on social media. And you can do that by going to the show notes or just jennturner.com. Don't leave yet, though. At the end of every podcast, we have, of course, Spotlight, the part of the podcast where we highlight other people, projects, or things that we think are awesome and just need a little bit more light put on them. My spotlight today is really, really embarrassing. Nolan Lawson is awesome, is rightfully famous and cool, is the best person, and has been on this podcast before. Along with everyone else.
Of course he has.
Of course he's been on the podcast. He recorded it in September 2020. And I looked for it while you were talking. And that was before I hired Tina, my amazing, amazing assistant who helps me out with things that I drop. And I never published it. And so I'm going to go away and listen to it and see if it's salvageable. I feel so bad. But more, I feel like I've cheated everyone, including Nolan Lawson, out of listening to a beautiful podcast that was recorded with an amazing person. So my shout out is to Nolan, who really should just be on every episode from now on, because again, they're really cool and I just feel horrible. So I'm grateful. I'm sorry. And I'm going to fix that. Nolan, if you're listening, maybe come on again. A lot of water has passed under the bridge since 2020. Don't know about you. So that's mine. Great person, Nolan Lawson.
Jenn, oh my gosh. I don't know if you want the podcast to blow up that big. No one's a big deal. That's so
I know. Funny. I'm horrified right now, but it happens. I'm trying to learn how to forgive myself.
Also, it sounds like shout out to Tina.
Tina is really the best person. Tina, Paul, and Deanne. Without them, I'd be screwed. Without Tina, I don't know what I'd do. She is the person who uploads this to the podcast website. She's the person who makes the art now. And she's the person who emails people like the week before or the week after. Tina is amazing. And she is always looking for more work. So if you need a good digital assistant, you can go to digitalsavvies.com. And I highly, highly suggest Tina.
Nice. I'm going to tell one of my friends because he desperately needs a digital assistant. So that's perfect.
They're really helpful.
Okay. So this is called Spotlight. My spotlight for this episode is one of my favorite web experiences and websites. And it is my former colleague, and she's not my biggest fan. I'm her biggest, even after all of these years of not working together. And that is my friend Lynn Fisher's personal website. She goes by the moniker Lynn and Tonic online. So you can find her at that. But every year she does a complete refresh of her website. And it is just a technical feat. People do not understand the amount of CSS prowess this woman has. And she's the most humble person in the world. She's been on like NPR, like people featured her in all of the big things. And she's just like the sweetest person who you can geek out to Marvel stuff with. She's the best. One of my favorite ones was when she drew herself into the Bob's Burgers scenery. And her like outfit and stuff would change if you would resize the browser window. And she has each year's refresh on there. So yeah, if you go to lynnandtonic.com, I mean, I'll never stop singing the praises of Lynn Fisher. She's just an amazing talent that the internet is better for having, because that's the best of the internet, is like cool, weird, fun, niche type projects that people create and share, and we all are better for it because we get to enjoy it. So I hope you're doing well out there, Lynn. I love you.
Lynn is awesome. Lynn is also one of my favorite people who I haven't thought of in a long time. So I'm really excited that you have brought Lynn back into my mental life. Definitely do check out Lynn and Tonic. That's LYNN and Tonic. Lynn is the best, and she has always been really good at CSS.
Yeah.
Jenn, thank you so much for coming on. Listeners, thank you so much for listening. As a part of a shared promise I have with my guest, I make sure that this goes live. And so you were able to listen to this. If you weren't able to listen to this, let me know as soon as possible, because I don't want to drop another guest ever again. So anyway, that having been said, there are things you can do as listeners to make this a better experience for everyone. So first off, you can share this with everyone you know. Sharing is caring, says Maria Popova, and I trust her. She's awesome. You can also go on all the social medias and post it there. You can also email us and let us know what you think. Please complain. Go to podcast@sustainoss.org and let me know what I could do better, or Richard@sustainoss.org. that'd be fun. If you want other panelists to come on, email them too. Like, let us know who you want to hear. If you want other guests, let us know. Like and share this, like it on Apple and Spotify and all the horrible major monolithic web apps that now host podcasts. That'd be really, really dope. And of course, donate. You can go to opencollective.com/SustainOSS and you can send money our way. We did get a donation since the last time. Shout out to Anonymous. Anonymous, the $500 is really, really helpful, and that will help fund around 3 podcasts. That's how much this costs. So now you all know. And if you would love to help us have more podcasts, we would really appreciate it. If you work at a company, it may be easier for you to do so. We are not a 501c3, but if you really need it to be tax charitable, let me know, and I'm sure we could figure something out. Please donate to the podcast in general. And with that, sustainoss.org. Show notes are up there. Jenn, it was great to have you on. Thank you so much for taking the time today. Good luck with everything and keep up the great work.
Thank you so much. This was awesome. Thanks for having me.